Welcome everyone. In this video, we'll be talking about the topic disaster preparedness and prevention. Yes, what exactly is meant by disaster? Definitely, yes, if we can prevent it. In all probabilities, if we cannot prevent, and that's the most likely scenario, can we prepare for it so that it has a minimum impact on human life, on our flora and fauna. Look what is happening with us as our planet. When I say us, it's the our planet, and the planet has been exploited all round. In fact, 360-degree from every direction it has been hurt. In fact, if you look into it, there is in the past century an exponential growth of the human species, and we are in a dilemma whether such large number can be supported by our own planet. When I say supported, will there be enough food? Similarly, if there are more resources which have been exploited, the ecosystem is not able to bear it. Or should I say, there is a loss in flora, there is a loss in fauna. The agricultural output is have now been plateaued almost. As a result, what happens with it? With the rising prices, with the rising income level, people are also changing the way they are living. The standard of living has gone up, and probably as a result, it mitigates a lot of CFC, chlorofluorocarbon gases, greenhouse gases in the layman terminology, which is actually impacting the climate. And I look into it, the way things have been promoted, the main way things are shaping out. In fact, there are more pollutions in terms of air, in terms of noise, in terms of you name it, and we have it. The overall health well-being of the planet is at stake. And definitely, yes, we should not discount the factors of terrorism, which we do not plan. Again, it's a man-made disaster that we are talking about it. So terrorism, surprise attack like 911, probably here and there, every day there's a bombardment in the metro or in the tube, if you call it. If there is a stray lone wolf who is stabbing or probably opening fire, things like that, we should be going around it. Now, these are the disasters that we would love to go around. Just to make my point, I will take cite certain data from the Asian region, specifically from the South Asian region. And if you look into it, the risk of climate change is increasing overall. What does it mean? It means that it is threatening the systems, the ecosystem. There's a large scale singular event which manipulates or navigates your mindset towards one of the things, the global aggregated impact. Look at how the CO2 is rising over a period of time, right? From 1000 ACs, and what is happening around here. Similarly, the GHG, the greenhouse gases emission over the next decades, is something which needs to be worried, and it should send shivers to the spine of the human population per se. Primarily speaking, there are three reasons. One, the overall melting of the glaciers, overall increase in the temperature means there are more increased riverine, coastal, urban flooding. Absolutely, yes, because the temperature is rising, the glaciers are melting, and the water is expanding. You know, when water is at room temperature and when water is boiling, it expands. Probably that is what is happening with the flood situation. And it does impact in a great deal. Then we have, with the temperature rising, there are air pollution, there are noise pollution, you name it, the mortality rate for a heat related diseases, for example, heart attack, for example, sunburn, for example, stroke, is increasing. On the contrary, because of the due heat, you are not only having floods but also is having drought. In case there are no flood, there is a drought. It is the slowest killer that is possibly having around here, and that is what I would love to inform you. Now, just a small economic losses of natural disaster, and I have taken it for last 30, 40 years altogether. And if you look into it, tsunami plus earthquake, what is the impact? Storm, others, flood, wildfire, as the case might be. Elements of risk. I will come into those wildfire and how much percentage do they impact in our lives. Probably what are the chances of that occurring in your life, my life, probably in our livelihood. So let us first address what are the risk with disaster. First and foremost is hazard. It's all that is detrimental to the property, to the life. It is the exposure. A prolonged exposure might be very concerning for human life per se. We are vulnerable to it. Why are we vulnerable? If did I say about the 911, the human manifested disaster? Did I say about the climate? Did I say about the population? Did I? So these are the things that needs to be taken around where we don't have a hand in probably taking care of it or mitigating it or coming with a solution. So these are beyond our means. So we are very vulnerable, and then of course the location comes around it. Now if you are in a high risk prone zone, and you can name it, there are certain regions in the world where there is a perennial war going around it for no reasons, for no rhymes, but it is going around, and it will go around for also because the solution is not as at the thing. There's a risk. If you are in a seismologically sensitive zone, you are staying in a risk, obviously, yes. So these are the things that needs to be taken into account as your risk. What are the hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and location? Just to drive my point, I have given you a pic of a tsunami. Look where the tsunami is happening in the middle of the ocean. This is the middle of the ocean that happening, and it is going to impact so far off places altogether. So, meteorological disaster number one is typhoon. According to historical data, storms, typhoon account for approximately half, 49%, if I may say so, half of all natural disaster. That's typhoon, that's storm, that is tornado, you name it. We have certain other significance nomenclature for it. Then comes flood, also one of the major and most dangerous types of natural disaster, constituting of approximately 37%. This is flood, and it is occurring around the globe, at every corner of the globe. Look what I've said: typhoons, tornadoes, storms accounts for 49%, floods account for 37%, drought. Believe me or not, I have already stated it that this is the silent killer. The third greatest loss, despite representing only 2% of the disaster event, it happens. It happens only 2%. And it happens very slowly. Before you realize, you are in the middle of a drought, and there are regions which are in the middle of the drought. Another disaster which is account for 3% is landslide. But the good thing about this disaster is that it is present, or the most likelihood of having landslide is always in a large mountainous area or probably low land areas by deltas. That is where it is going to happen around it. So typhoon 49%, flood 37%, drought only 2%, and landslide 3%. That is what meteorological disasters goes around it. Here I'm giving you the characteristics of disaster. Now remember, characteristics of disaster most of the times are beyond our purview. We cannot control them. So they might be negative, but we can always prepare for it, right? So first, we cannot predict. The predictability is very difficult. Whether the earthquake is happening, and with the advances of science, the predictability, of course, have been narrowed down, and we are getting more or less accurate predictions nowadays as far as weather is changing is concerned. But for earthquake, probably no. For tsunami, probably partially yes. Similarly, for controllability, absolutely. I have been trying to emphasize on the word called controllability, that human beings do not have real, requisite control over pending disaster to happen. Speed of the onset, except for drought, everything happens overnight. Everything happens within a second, and you will never know. It is your landslide, probably, it is your earthquake, probably. You name it, and the disaster happens. Even a terrorist attack, nobody will come to know about it. So, the length of forewarning. Now, because of the advances of the sciences, the length of forewarning has increased. Maybe few hours, few minutes, few days. That is what we are talking around it. For for cloud formation, we can to a certain degree can predict a weeks in advance, probably, and that is the length of forewarning that we go around it. Remember, disaster happens within a split of a second. It might happen for 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, but the impact is everlasting. It the impact that the disaster leaves might stay for years together, decades together, and for certain times for centuries together. Scope and intensity of the impact is one of those that is very of grievous concern and probably is beyond the control of the human being. Hazard exposure and what we are talking in terms of disaster risk management. What are we looking into it? We are looking about the direct and indirect risk, what comes around it. Disaster risk is all about hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. Right. Now, if this is an impact, look at the circle that I'm trying to draw. If this is an impact that a disaster have, can we control it and make it this smaller circle? So that is what comes around it. The bigger the triangle and the smaller the triangle. If we can reduce hazard, if we can reduce exposure, the vulnerability of a person can be taken into account, and that is what we are looking for. Let us try to build up the resilience. Resilience is what we are talking about. Etymology, way back in 17th century, as a Latin word resilience is all about rebounding, recoiling, reback, refire, and probably standing up against the situation, probably trying to figure out where were you and how can you come back. Resilience is the capacity of a system to absorb disturbances and reorganizes while undergoing change so as to still remain essentially the same function, structure, identity, and feedback. And that is what we all strive to go around it. Remember, as far as resilience alliance states, resilience is the ability to observe disturbances, to be changed and then reorganize, and still have the same identity, retain the same basic structure, ways of functioning. It includes the ability to learn from disturbances. A resilient system is forgiving of external shocks, as the case might be. So, what are the key factors influencing resiliences and probably mitigating disaster risks? First and foremost thing are the institution. If we can plan it out, if there is a political leadership that can take into their spirit that they are going to fight the stiff impact of the disaster. Now that is all about leadership, participation, representation. Institutional is all about planning, probably about science, probably foregoing about it, and looking at how to respond, what should be done, and what is the SOP standard operating procedures for any impact that goes around it. Cultures is the knowledge transfer, the belief system, the custom that we talk around here. Social is all about communication, supports, network, organization, inclusion, conflict resolution. Now, these are what matters altogether. Then we have the environment. Environment is all about proper usage of land. We should be building earthquake-friendly buildings, constructing earthquake-friendly buildings in a seismologically sensitive zone. That's one thing which you need to go around it. What does it mean? It might be a little bit of a technology that needs to be taken into around it. Let us not build high-rise building in a seismologically sensitive area. So we can use land uses, access to natural resources, sustainability. Human is all about food security, health, education. Similarly for economic, income security, access to market and employment, livelihood, diversity and flexibility, financial services, land tenure. Physical is all about structures, water supply, and sanitation thereby. Now, what is DRMC or disaster risk management cycle, and how do we go around it? If we look into it, we should plan it as a pre-disaster state's affair is concerned. This is what we are looking forward to it. We should look about the risk, about the mitigation, how to prevent it, and can we prepare for it. During, now this is where the evacuation warning comes around it. It is your response team, as in what is happening around there. What are you doing out here? This is what we should be doing. The saving people, providing immediate assistance, and so on and so forth. Similarly, for ongoing assistance program. Similarly, for post disaster, and what do we go for post disaster? This is what we look into it for post-disaster, about reconstructions, economic surveys, economic recovery, giving stimulus, ongoing development activities. Now, these are things that needs to be taken into account every now and then. The restorations has to be taken there. The risk mitigation factor needs to be taken, because every time there's a disaster, every time you fight it out, every time you come out of it, you need to learn a lesson. So that similar disaster, or should I say, similar impact of disaster is not being felt. We should be able to prevent it. The outright avoidance of adverse impact of hazard and related disaster, can we prevent it? Most probably no. Remember, prevention is express the concepts of intention to completely avoid potential adverse impact. This is simply not possible. But for an earthquake-prone zone, if we can have constructing buildings, can we use technology so that the building can probably mitigate certain 3.1 or 2.1 movement of the seismic zone, as the case might be. Similarly, for flood related low lying areas, can there be embankment? Can we construct embankment so that the river flow is contained as long? We need to understand what can be done, and that is what prevention is all about. It. Let us talk about mitigation. Remember, mitigation is somewhat what I have been explaining it to you till now. Can we have buildings, accommodations which are earthquake friendly? Can we have low-lying areas with an embankment which can, to a certain degree, help us to prevent the outflow of waters or contain flood per se? Now, this is the lessening or the limiting of the adverse impact that we goes around in mitigation. Can we have technology for our air conditions, for our refrigerations, so that they do not emit greenhouse gases, they do not emit chlorofluorocarbons? Can we have transportation which do not consume fossil fuels, and so on and so forth? Now, this is what we're all about. Mitigation is concerned. So we have spoken about preparation, we have prevention, we have spoken about mitigation. Now let us talk about preparation. Preparation is a knowledge and capacity developed by governments, by professional responses, recovery organization, communities, individuals to effectively anticipate, respond to, recover from the impact of likely imminent or current hazards, events, or condition per se. Now, this is knowledge. This is science. The repository of knowledge in concentrated in the hands of few. If they can utilize this to mitigate, to prevent, or to fight disaster, and that is what preparedness is all about. It preparedness is an action being carried out within the context of disaster risk management. That is what we can go around it. Can we have a mock drill in case there's a tsunami that is hitting, in case there's an earthquake, if there's an evacuation, in case there's a fire in the building? Can we have a mock drill? Can we have a field exercise? Ensure that there is participation from the public, ensure that there is a community involvement. This will help us to mitigate adverse situation in the shortest possible amount of time. Look what happened with the floods. Floods in the plain, in the city, as the case might be, floods in the valley. What it leaves destructions beyond than happen. So disaster is waiting to happen. Probably we just cannot avoid it, but we can always plan for it. We cannot just think if it has to happen, let it happen, then we'll see around here. That is not possible. because we do not know when the disaster is bound to happen. Remember, an ounce of prevention is a worth of a pound of cure, as been stated way back in 1736 by Benjamin Franklin. That is what we are looking around it. A small step can help us mitigate a big amount of risk, and that is what uh, is all about. Not only, I'm not talking about only insurance, but also about risk management is what we are looking around it. We need to keep hedges in position. Structural and non-structural measures in disaster prevention and preparedness for planning. Structural measures, any physical constructions to reduce, probably to avoid possible impact of hazards. Application of engineering techniques to achieve hazard resistance and resilience in structures and system. Similarly, for non-structural measures, any measures not involving any sort of physical construction that uses just pure knowledge, pure practice, pure agreement to reduce the risk and impact, in particular through policies, through laws, through public awareness. Now, how do we go around it? Let's say if we are driving a car, which is consuming fossil fuel, can we increase the price of the fuel? Probably. That makes probably that makes public not want, or it doesn't make that the fossil fuel run vehicle very attractive for them to purchase. Or in the other words, can we have the environmentally friendly fuel, if there are any, let's say the electric cars, let's say the hydrogen car, can we subsidize it? Can we reduce it? Can the government provide incentives to the public to own such a car? Now, this is a non-structural measure that goes around through policies. Structural measures I've already stated around here, with construction of building, or let's say having a refrigeration or air condition with proper technology so that it doesn't have emits greenhouse gases. Disaster preparedness should be in form of money, materials, manpower. Evaluation from past experiences, repeatedly been telling it to you about it. That becomes your repository of knowledge. Previous disaster, what happened and how did we mitigate? Can we do it better this time? Location of disaster prone areas, probably science is going to help us around here. Yes, communication, information, and forewarning system is what we need to develop and should be installed in places where disasters are waiting to happen, ensuring coordination, response mechanism, as the case might be. Development of public education programs, that is what we are looking around it. Coordination with the media, national, international relations, keeping stock of foods, stock of drugs, stock of other essential commodities that needs to talk around it. Remember, this global knowledge, this experiences is what will help us prepare for any pending disaster to happen. It is all about resilient development, resilient transportation. Science and technology needs to be advanced and should be utilized for for humanity, for our own planet. The environmental protection is what we are looking into it. Policy implementation, yes, the leader, the political willpower will enable us to ensure that we, our children, our grandchildren, the next generation, for perhaps for a continuous number of centuries, that this planet is vibrant and viable altogether. So yes, we are talking about resilient enterprises and natural and tech hazard. So let us wind it up by recommending the disaster preparedness. Now we can have something called self-help groups, the women groups. You believe me or not, the youth power is immense. Can we have government which is anticipatory? Can we have simulation exercise? Can we have indigenous knowledge system, and how, what were the coping practices in previous centuries? How did people lived around it? Why is it that of late, in the past century, disasters are waiting to happen and they are making grand, vicious outcomes? Now, this is what we are looking around it. Yes, we should be prepared for living with the risk, as in community-based disaster management. No, recommendation is all about investment or making awareness, prevention, technology. We take about it, we talk about it, we make people sensitive about it, we communicate what is pending to happen and what, how can we have minimize the losses thereby. Remember, disasters of late has become somewhat predictable, especially in their seasonality or the time of the month or probably time of the year which it can go around it. Communities must be involved in disaster preparedness. Without their help, it is just not possible for you to do around it. The last thing is all about community participation, all about coming together, joining hands, no matter where you are working from, what you are doing, from what background it is, all about it. Irrespective of a gender, irrespective of age, we should all work to make our planet a vibrant one. Technology should be utilized to ensure that it makes our life much more beautiful, much more smoother, without impacting the flora and fauna. Knowledge management, and yes, the public-private partnership is the way to go forward. With this, I come to an end of this presentation. Thank you for watching this video till the very end.